We spend a lot of time, and especially because I was leaving middle school and entering high school, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, our own personalities and who we are, and we go through these different cliques and these different friend groups, and that in itself is kind of stressful. And so it's kind of like I take a 3-day weekend and get to be somebody else who has an established character, and I can understand that. And so you get to be a day where you can not worry about having to be necessarily fully the self that you've decided you maybe want to be when you're older, or whatever I say, speaking from like 13-year-old me starting to do this, and I can be whatever.
Cosplay is a combination of the words costume and roleplay. When people cosplay, they dress and act as an existing character. Cosplay is frequently associated with anime, Japanese cartoons, and manga, Japanese comic books.
It started at science fiction and fantasy conventions more than the anime technically it started in like the 30s, which is super long time ago, in the United States. The term cosplay itself is Japanese, which came from English, which is its own kind of thing because Japanese language itself is interesting. But in Japan, they saw our versions of the science fiction sort of cosplay, and they adapted it because they have more anime than science fiction. And so they started cosplaying anime and manga characters, and then we saw that and we thought, oh, they've invented this thing where they dress as anime and manga characters, and we should do that too. And I think because of that, which happened in about the 90s, because of that, it's mostly like a convention thing, but there's anime conventions, there's video game conventions, there's sci-fi conventions.
The origins of cosplay go back to some of the earliest conventions in both science fiction and comics. I'm not sure exactly when the first science fiction conventions were, but I think the Worldcon has been going on at least since the 1950s. And people would come to Worldcon in like spacesuits and things like that, and that would be one of the origins. Comics conventions didn't really start until the mid to the late 1960s. One of the most famous one is Phil Seuling's Comics Art Convention, which I believe started in New York in 1968. And even there, and even in some of the earlier ones, even before Seuling's convention, you had people dressing like superheroes or spacemen or things like that. So they have origins in what these days is called quote-unquote nerd culture.
Cosplay happens almost exclusively at conventions or special events.
I was going to my first anime convention in a long time ago, and I just kind of looked it up because I didn't know what kind of environment to expect, and I just saw this thing where everybody was like, oh, we're cosplaying and we're all dressed as whatever, and I thought that was required.
Yeah, there is some social pressure to it, to cons, yeah. But it's okay. I don't feel like it's like a bad thing necessarily, because it's fun. Cosplaying is fun, and going to a con and cosplay is fun. So it's not necessarily bad, and it's not like cosplaying is something that's like only for the elite, like you have to be really good at it. That's just not true. You can do something simple and it'll still be great, and then there won't be that same pressure.
As with most social events, there is stratification among cosplayers.
There's a lot of people that think, oh, well, it's not cosplay if you didn't make it yourself, and that sort of stigma has been going on for a little bit. I know I used to feel that way, but partially for me it's mostly pride, because if they come up to me and they're like, oh, where did you buy your costume from? It looks really good. And if I can say I made it, I just feel so much more proud of myself for having done so. But then there's some people that feel like, oh, well, buying it's like the easy way out, and you didn't really work hard for it. But they worked hard for the money to pay for it, and they're supporting someone who did make it and did work really hard to make it. But there are a lot of people, especially in the slightly more competitive level of cosplaying, a lot of the competitions where you can earn higher amounts of money, like $100 and over, you have to make everything yourself, or there's a percentage, like maybe 85% of the costume has to have been made by you, and then the other percentage can be things you bought or repurposed. But because of that, I feel like that is sort of working on the stigma of you have to make it or it's not really valid.
I like to see what people do, how they interpret the character, and what they do with the resources they have. I think that's part of the fun too. If you buy a ready-made costume, I mean, if you can pull it off, great. If you have the acting skills to do it, then that kind of makes up for it. You got to be able to pull it off.
There is also a multifaceted gender bias in cosplay.
I think there is kind of a trend in the characters I cosplay. I started out actually doing all male characters for a really long time because I felt more comfortable in like slacks and a blazer, which for the Japanese school uniform for like high school boys, that's pretty much all it is. And I felt safe, I guess, kind of in that. And also a lot of characters that I've cosplayed, you know, they were originally all kind of from anime, and so a lot of the women's outfits were really revealing, and I wasn't comfortable with that.
I wouldn't really say that like women can't cosplay or men can't cosplay. It's just, I guess like women have to tread a little more carefully, and if you go with something that's like super feminine, if a girl does like, you know, this super sexy version of a character, there might be some kind of stigma attached to that. Whereas if a man were to do the same thing, it's just silly, you know? It's just silly and fun. But I suppose that's more about just general gender bias than it is cosplay specifically.
Well, I think these days the most important aspect of cosplay is that it's predominantly women. I mean, one of the things that's associated with nerd culture is that it's sort of a grumpy boys club, right? You know, all the guys get together and roll the 20-sided die when they're playing D&D and such. But no, I think it means that women are participating in fandom in numbers that they never had before.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot more pressure put on female cosplayers as opposed to male cosplayers, because a lot of, like I mentioned, a lot of anime, they very like hypersexualize the female characters, and so a lot of female cosplayers feel the need, like if they're looking for a character that maybe isn't like that, it might be harder to even like find one at all or feel comfortable in it, or they feel like they have to be practically half naked to then be acceptable, which is wrong. And so, or they can start off like me and just dress as men for 3 days in a row and just be fine.
Sometimes cosplay even takes on a kind of like gender fluid dimension where women dress as male superheroes and guys dress as female superheroes and or female characters from quote unquote nerd culture.
I would like to be like, oh, I think crossplay is great, you know, people can play whatever gender they want. But I do have to, you gotta be able to pull it off, because if you play a character that is the opposite gender and you don't do anything to it, it's just gonna come across as silly.
Like I've seen guys in skirts with like better legs than I do, and I'm like, you do that, you earned that, you know? And then there's some people that still don't think it's appropriate. But usually, yeah, I feel like there's more negative comments towards female cosplayers than toward male cosplayers, but sometimes it can also depend on like what exactly the outfit looks like.
If you want to be taken seriously, we're gonna have to maybe go more the Rule 63 route, where you like change the character to fit the gender that you're going for. Yeah, I do think that just straight crossplay, where if you just throw an outfit meant for one gender onto another gender, it's gonna be hard to take them seriously. And it's hard for me to take them seriously, even though I would like to be able to. But if you put in the extra effort to kind of bend the character to suit the other gender, like as if they were the other gender to begin with, then that just shows even more creativity, it shows even more, what's the word I'm looking for? Initiative. It shows even more initiative than it might have if you hadn't done that. I think that's really cool.
As with most things, there are negative elements to the cosplay culture.
There is a small, very vocal conservative aspect of a lot of fandoms that really look down on cosplay. Sexual harassment is an issue too. At conventions, for example, a number of conventions this year had to adopt rules about sexually harassing women, let's say, for example, in cosplay outfits, saying if you do, you're out.
I've had somebody also vaguely harass me in that situation. I was like, I don't know you. Like, they thought because the characters were dressed as kind of fight, and so they like put their hands on my throat, and I was like, that's not acceptable. Who are you?
Roleplay is an important part of cosplay. Many cosplayers take the roleplay aspect of their performances very seriously. For others, it's simply fun.
I think that makes it more fun if the character is like you, or if you can identify with their personality, with their struggles, then it just makes it more fun to cosplay as them. Because then, if you're really into it, there can be a certain role-playing element to it even, and you can just feel confident that you're pulling off the character well, and that people will look at you and go, oh wow, that's a really great cosplay, if you kind of carry yourself the same way, or you act the same way. It just comes across looking better.
But I feel like most people, they love that, to really be their character for a day or 3 days is what they're looking for. And so, well, I'm, I guess, slightly toned down from that. It's cute for like photo shoots, I think, and things like that. But some people, that really is like why they cosplay, is to completely escape and embrace this other person. And that's usually how they pick the characters that they want it to be, is they're like, oh, I wish I was cool like so-and-so, or I wish I was strong like so-and-so, or, and then they can embody that. And I feel like that's fine and probably better, as long as they're not like too like invasive of other people's space and their feelings on it.